Welcome to Sports Takes with Nate Skates. I'm your host, Nate. Today we're going to be talking about the recent college football playoff rankings, and we're going to discuss how I think Miami and BYU are getting the short end of the stick due to brand bias and inconsistent criteria by the playoff committee. This is our inaugural show, and so I want to tell you a little bit about me and what I hope to accomplish with this podcast. I'm a lifelong sports lover. I'm a diehard Georgia Bulldog, Atlanta Braves fan, and I also just love watching college football in general. And I am not going to be an unbiased observer. I come from the Larry Munson School of Broadcasting, meaning I'm not going to act like I don't have a rooting interest in sports. I'm a Bulldog all the way. I'm a Braves fan all the way, and that's probably going to be very evident through the podcast. But just because I'm a fan of those teams doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about other teams. And so we're going to talk about topics across college football, Major League Baseball, and the sports landscape. So if you're a fan of the Big Ten, you're a fan of Alabama, you're a fan of the Yankees, there's going to be something for you on these shows. But you're probably going to hear more about Georgia, the SEC, the Braves than you are about, the Mariners, the Big 12, whatever. So also just want to talk a little bit about why I started this podcast. I've watched a lot of ESPN, a lot of so-called experts in the industry, and you see a lot of pundits who just clearly don't know anything about sports. They're media personalities, they're debaters, they're provocateurs, and they care more about making hot takes to try to get clicks or pushing a supposed next superstar than they really care about watching the games and making informed opinions. So if you're like me, you're a diehard college football fan, you weren't going into this season picking Arch Manning or DJ Lagway to win the Heisman this season. But somehow everyone on ESPN was telling you that not only was Arch going to win the Heisman, but he was going to go to the NFL and win MVP next season. And DJ Lagway was going to take Florida, who has been reeling for years, to the playoffs this season. And look, I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure that most fans could have looked at that going into the season and saying a very inexperienced Arch Manning, coming from a small high school, is not ready to be the Heisman Trophy candidate this year. And we've seen that play out throughout the seasons. And certainly the same with DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway has a lot of talent, he's a lot of ability, but what did we see from DJ Lagway that said he's going to take Florida to the playoffs? No, that was never going to happen. And I think the average fan could see that going into the season. So I'm not a former college football player. I'm not going to break down blocking schemes in minute detail for you. I'm just a guy who loves sports. I'm going to talk to you from the view of a fan who spends his Saturdays binging college football and spends every day of the summer watching America's pastime. And I believe the typical fan has better takes than the media. The media is trying to get you to get angry, to click on their video, and they're not really making informed opinions. You've got guys who clearly only watch the NBA running around talking about college football. So I think the average fan really has more knowledge about the topics than the people you see on ESPN. So now that we got all that out of the way, I want to go ahead and delve into the most recent college football rankings from last Tuesday. And I was prepared going in that we were probably going to have a similar rankings to week before. And I was already prepared, that I was going to be pretty irritated with the way that the committee puts, Notre Dame in front of Miami. And I think that's completely unjustifiable. And so I was not disappointed when the rankings came down Tuesday, and I was as angry as I expected to be about it. So we're going to look at that just a little bit and the resumes for the teams, particularly the teams ranked 9 through 14. I'm going to give you my rankings, what I think the playoffs should be looking like, and just talk a little bit about the playoff format and why I think the committee is ranking teams the way that they're ranking them. So first, let's just read it down the list if you haven't looked at it already. Here's how the College Football Playoff Committee ranked the teams on Tuesday. You got Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Texas Tech at 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. I'm not going to argue with that. That's my 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you got Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M after that big loss to Texas, Oklahoma. There's not really a lot of surprises there. You may or may not agree. You may disagree with that, but nobody was really shocked that those are the teams, 1 through 8. Here's where we had some problems. So you have Alabama at number 9. So Alabama jumps Notre Dame after a close game against a Auburn team that fired Hugh Freeze earlier in the season and isn't going to a bowl game. So, we're going to talk about that here in a minute. They got Notre Dame at 10, BYU at 11, Miami at 12, Texas jumps up to 13, Vanderbilt at 14, Utah at 15. And I'm not going any further than that because those are the only teams with any shot at the playoff. So here's where I think it should be different. I've got the same 1 through 4 as the committee. I flip-flop Ole Miss and Oregon, but I don't see those teams as really there's not a whole lot of difference in resume of those teams. The reason I put Ole Miss in front of Oregon is because Ole Miss has wins over Oklahoma, who is number 8 in the playoff, and Tulane, yeah, okay, whatever, ranked 20th. But Oregon's top wins are USC, that's a pretty good win, 9-3 USC team, and Iowa, who's ranked in the lower 20s. So I just pretty well just looked at it as I think Ole Miss is in a better conference. I think Ole Miss has a really electric offense. I like their win over Oklahoma better than I like Oregon's win over USC being their top win. But to me, those teams are interchangeable at 5 and 6. 7, Texas A&M. Texas A&M's has a great season, but as far as SEC schedules goes, been pretty weak. Have a pretty bad loss to Texas, where especially the first half you don't look great. You nearly get beat by South Carolina the week before. So they're 11-1 in the SEC. That's great, but I'm not going to put them in front of the other one-loss teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. Oklahoma at 8, and that's where you got to give Oklahoma the tiebreaker over Alabama, in my opinion, and the committee thought so as well. Now, for me, I've got Alabama at 9. I think Alabama has done enough with their resume playing in the SEC, beating Georgia, beating, a decent Missouri team, beating Tennessee, beating, these teams week in and week out in the SEC. They've had a tough schedule, beat Vanderbilt. And so I've got them at 9. Here's where I really start breaking with the committee. I've got Miami at 10, and we're going to talk about that more. I've got BYU at 11. I've got Notre Dame at 12, Texas at 13, and Vanderbilt at 14. So by and large, I've got a pretty similar rankings to the committee, but there's some major points of disagreement there. To me, it's absurd that you would put Notre Dame in front of Miami. There's absolutely no justification for it. You're making these rankings based off, well, we feel Notre Dame is better. Well, this metric says Notre Dame is better. Okay, well, what does the play on the field say? The play on the field says that Miami is a better football team than Notre Dame. Notre Dame has kind of an established pattern now of losing early in the season, going on a great run, getting in the playoff, or getting in a great bowl game or whatever. Okay, well, the first 2 games of the season count equally to the games the rest of the season. If Notre Dame's not ready to play the first 2 weeks of the season, that doesn't mean that those 2 games don't count. You have to be ready, from day one. And, did they play Miami close? Yes, but they lost. Miami has a head-to-head win over Notre Dame. That has to be the most critical point, the most critical criteria for the committee has to be head-to-head. If you have two teams with the same record and Miami beats Notre Dame on the field, how are you going to tell me that Notre Dame deserves to be in the playoff more than Miami? And it's not even just head-to-head. They have four common opponents. Let's read down that list. You've got games against NC State. Okay, well, Miami beat NC State 41-7. You've got a game against Syracuse, 38-10 by Miami. You've got a game against Stanford, 42-7 by Miami. And you've got the Pitt game, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So in four of these matchups, both teams, Miami and Notre Dame, beat all four of those teams. In three of the four games, Miami won by a larger margin than Notre Dame won by. So all I've heard about is, oh, Notre Dame, they're blowing teams out. Oh, the game control. Look what they did to Syracuse on their third string quarterback or whatever. Okay, well, Miami's been beating these teams by a bigger margin than Notre Dame. I really want to focus on this Pitt game. The justification a few weeks ago for putting Notre Dame in front of Miami was, oh, well, Notre Dame has just clearly established themselves as a superior team to Miami. We're putting them in a separate grouping than Miami. And that was after their win against Pitt. So Pitt's coming in, they're ranked. Okay, great. And Notre Dame beats the snot out of them. Okay, wonderful. Good job, Notre Dame. Okay, well, what happens after that? Pitt goes into Georgia Tech and gets up 28-0 and ends up winning that game by 2 touchdowns over a ranked team at Georgia Tech. Okay, well, we were told that if Miami impressed the committee with a big win, they might move up into the same grouping as Notre Dame. Okay, well, what did Miami do to Pittsburgh after the Georgia Tech win? Well, they beat Pittsburgh 38-7. How much did Notre Dame win by? Okay, they beat Pitt 37-15. I'm not a math expert. Miami won by more points than Notre Dame did. So we have four common opponents. Miami beats three of them by a larger margin. You have a head-to-head game. Miami wins that game. So I'm really struggling. In what universe does Notre Dame have an argument over Miami? And if you take to social media, which of course is a cesspool of lots of opinions you may or may not want to hear, typically what I saw as responses from Notre Dame fans on this topic was, we're just better, deal with it. Notre Dame is better, cry harder. Okay, that's great, but that's not an argument. You can't say, we're just better, deal with it. How are you better? How are you better? Are you better because you have better wins? Well, no. Notre Dame's best win is USC. Their second best win is Pitt. Okay, well, we've already been over that Miami beat Pitt by a more impressive margin than Notre Dame did. Miami's got to win over Notre Dame. That's a more impressive win, even if it wasn't head-to-head, than a win over USC by 10 points. I mean, it's clearly Miami has the better resume, and you can't argue otherwise. The only way that you can make an argument for Notre Dame is if you ignore the results on the field, and if you only talk about analytics, what's their strength of record, what's their game control. I don't care about that. I don't care. When we're talking about two teams who have the same record, have a head-to-head game, you cannot take an analytic metric over results on the field. And I really think Miami's getting the short end of the stick here. Sure, they have a loss to Louisville by 3 points. I don't see that as a disqualifying loss. Louisville is not a bad team. They are a pretty good team. They have a 6-point overtime loss to SMU. That is not a bad loss. That's not Alabama's loss to Florida State. That is, as losses go, a pretty good loss. And I just don't see. I mean, look what they did to South Florida early in the season. We were all, oh, South Florida's a Cinderella story. Look what they did to Florida. What did Miami do to South Florida? 49-12. Followed that up by waxing Florida. Followed it up by beating the same Florida State team who beat Alabama. So to me, it's ludicrous that Miami is not in the same grouping as Notre Dame. That's silly. If you want to criticize the ACC, you're right to do that. If you want to criticize Miami for not making it to the ACC championship game, you're right to do that. It is insane to put Notre Dame in front of Miami. So moving on, and we're going to circle back to the Notre Dame issue. Let's talk about, I want to break down 9 through 14 a little bit and see what their arguments are for being in the playoff versus being left out of the playoff. And before we get into that, really what we've got to look at here is we have a problem with the playoff format. You've got the potential that James Madison or North Texas, or if you really want to get crazy, 7-5 would be at that point 8-5 Duke. Do you want to see 8-5 Duke in the playoffs? I don't. Do you want to see James Madison, whose only Power 4 game was a monstrous loss to Louisville, in the playoff? I don't. Those teams are overmatched. You had a great season. Good for you. You don't need to be in the college football playoff. So that's the real problem here. 2 of the spots are going to get taken up by conference champions who probably don't have any business in the playoff. I'm not talking about Virginia there. If Virginia wins the ACC championship, to me, Virginia's earned a spot in the playoff at that point. Do I think Virginia is one of the 12 best teams? Probably not. But Virginia has wins over good teams. Virginia made it to their conference championship game. I'm not going to be upset if Virginia's in the playoff. I am going to be upset if North Texas, James Madison, or Duke are in the playoff, or really even Tulane, if we're being honest here. I mean, you got a loss to Ole Miss. That was your shot. You didn't succeed. I don't see that Tulane should be in the playoff. So that's really where we've got a problem here, is these automatic qualifiers. And when we expanded the playoff, this was always going to be a problem. From my vantage point, pre-2023, there generally were not even really 4 teams who needed to be in the playoff. I mean, you were having blowouts in the 4-team playoff. There were generally 2 to 3 teams, maybe 4 to 5, who had a good argument for the playoff. I mean, I want elite teams in the playoffs. I don't want middling teams in the playoff. That changed in 2023. You had 2 teams who completely deserved to be in the playoff get left out. And, that made everybody even more hungry for the already incoming 12-team playoff. But with the 12-team playoff format, what did we get last year? You had Boise State with a bye. You had a Mountain West team with a bye, and they lost in the first round. And I'm not trying to diminish what they accomplished. I'm not trying to diminish the season that Ashton Genty had. I'm just saying teams from these smaller conferences do not need to have automatic qualifiers to the college football playoff. If you want to make the playoff, beat one of the top teams in the Power 4 conferences. So that's really where this whole format is broken. We could have 12 of the best teams if we didn't have automatic qualifiers. But moving on to the breaking down the resume. So the argument for Alabama at 9, I know a lot of people are mad about that, especially if you're a Notre Dame fan, maybe if you're a BYU fan, let's look at the resume. Do you guys have a win over Georgia? No. Okay, so Alabama has beaten better teams than the rest of the people 9 through 14. You've got a win over Georgia. You got a win over Vanderbilt. You've got a win over Tennessee and Missouri, which at the time were ranked teams, now are not. But I don't think anybody's going to say that Tennessee is not a good win. That's still a good win. Now, the problem with Alabama is you have the worst loss by far out of the teams 9 through 14. You got physically dominated. Talk about not being ready the first week of the season. You got physically dominated by a Florida State team who just got blown out by Florida. So you have a bad loss. There's no getting around that. And you could argue based off of that loss that Alabama should not be number 9, that they should be lower than teams like Miami, BYU, Notre Dame. But I think one bad loss does not counteract good wins against teams like Georgia and Vanderbilt. Yes, you've got the loss to Oklahoma. That's a 2-point loss. And that goes back to the head-to-head. The committee granted head-to-head as an important point for Oklahoma over Alabama. They granted Texas head-to-head over Vanderbilt despite having more losses. Why does head-to-head not matter in the Miami-Notre Dame debate? And then, okay, so let's talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a good team. No one is saying they're not a good team. The whole season, I have thought they were one of the better teams. When they were 0-2, I still thought this looked like a ranked team. I mean, you lost to Texas A&M on a muffed hold on an extra point. I mean, this is not a bad team, but you don't really have that much on your resume beyond a 10-point win over USC. I don't think anybody's really that impressed with wins over Pitt by Miami and Notre Dame anymore. I mean, sure, they had a great win against Georgia Tech, but it's not like Pitt is a playoff team. So basically, Notre Dame's resume is dependent on we beat USC and we pasted all the other teams we played, such as Syracuse, on their second or third string quarterbacks and hung 70. Okay, that's great. Does that make Notre Dame a playoff team? And I think there's certainly an argument that it does, that the dominance over the last several weeks makes them a playoff team. I don't necessarily agree with that, and it's not because I don't think Notre Dame's good enough to be in the playoff. It's not because I don't think Notre Dame's good enough to win games in the playoff. It's because I think resume based, they do not have as good an argument as Miami or BYU does. So again, let's talk about Miami. What's their argument? Your argument is you won head-to-head against Notre Dame. You've got a good resume. Your losses are not bad losses. You don't have a loss like Texas's loss to Florida or Alabama's loss to Florida State. And there's been some low moments for Miami, but it's not like they went out here and lost by 25 points like Texas did to Georgia. So to me, Miami is a playoff team. I don't think it's going to be good at all for the playoff for Miami to be left out, especially if it's for Notre Dame. You talk about people getting angry. You talk about calling the playoff fraudulent, rigged, brand bias, SEC bias, as we keep hearing all the time. You cannot leave Miami out of the playoff this season. They already didn't get in last season after going 10-2. You cannot leave Miami out of the playoff for Notre Dame. To me, that would be absolutely ludicrous. So then let's talk about BYU. What is BYU's argument? Well, you're 11-1. And so you have a better record than a lot of these teams we're talking about on the chopping block for the playoff. However, who have you played? I don't think anybody's going to say the Big 12 is the strongest conference in college football. It is not a bad conference. There were some pretty good teams, some teams that are on the cusp of being top 25, but BYU's schedule is not going to make Georgia shake in their boots. BYU's schedule is not going to scare Ohio State. You've got a 3-point win against Colorado, who had a really disappointing season. You know, you've got a pretty good win against Arizona, 33-27. Arizona's had a good year. Utah, they got a 3-point win over Utah. Utah is ranked 15th in the college football playoff. That's a good win. A 2-touchdown win over Iowa State. That's a pretty good win. I mean, that's one I wanted to say. I'd never bought into Iowa State as a top 15 team. I didn't understand where that was coming from because of a week one win against a Kansas State team who turned out to also not be a ranked team. Then you've got Texas Tech. So this is the issue for BYU to me. You had a shot to make your statement, and they're going to get another shot Saturday in the Big 12 championship, and that could all turn around right here. But you had your shot to beat a team that people really think is good in Texas Tech, and you didn't just lose. It's 29-7. That's not a good look. When you've got one shot to beat a really good team and you get beat by 22 points, you only score 7. That's not a good look to the playoff. And I think that's why BYU is kind of on the outside looking in. It's kind of why they're on the outside looking in to me. I think they should be ahead of Notre Dame, but I don't see them as on the same level as Miami and Alabama. Notre Dame, we've been over their resume. They have a pretty good argument. Texas. Okay, if you're Steve Sarkisian, you're saying, oh, if we hadn't played Ohio State, we'd be in the playoff because we'd only have 2 losses. If you're a Texas fan, you're saying, look at our wins. And Texas has some really good wins. Texas is a team that, what are you getting week to week? You're getting struggling in overtime against Kentucky and Mississippi State, and then you're getting beating Vanderbilt. You're getting a win over Texas A&M in the last week of the season. Those are good wins. You have a good resume. You have the 23-6 win over Oklahoma. That's a great win. Now, yes, John Mateer was probably coming back from injury a little bit too early, but you still got a 23-6 win over your rival Oklahoma, who's number 8 in the college football playoff. Texas has the wins to be in the playoff, but you have 3 losses. Okay? You have 3 losses. You are not being left out of the playoff because you lost to Ohio State. No one's holding a 14-7 loss at Ohio State the first week of the season as a disqualifier. What you have is an 8-point loss to Florida, who fired Billy Napier this year. You cannot lose to Florida. And I've seen Texas fans saying, oh, well, Georgia almost lost to Florida. Yeah, but they didn't. And that's really what matters here. The elite teams find ways to win those games. You do not lose games to bad teams that fire their head coaches during the season if you are an elite team. The games against Kentucky and Mississippi State, hey, you found a way to win the game, just like I said. But not exactly pretty. The problem to me with Texas, every bit as much as the loss with Florida, is you got physically dominated in the fourth quarter of the Georgia game. You've lost 3 in a row to Georgia, kind of been physically shut down in each of those games. I mean, I don't have the rushing stats handy, but they don't have 100 yards rushing in 3 games against Georgia. 35-10 in your shot to make a big statement just doesn't cut it. It's okay that you have the Ohio State loss. It's not okay that you have the Ohio State loss, a loss to a not very good Florida team, and a 25-point loss to Georgia. You don't deserve to be in the playoff. A 25-point loss to Georgia, a loss to Florida. And I'm not trying to say that Florida is a terrible team. We've seen a lot of teams this season that are playing teams close that don't win. Auburn's been one of these teams. Arkansas has been one of these teams. Florida's certainly been one of these teams that are playing teams close, but they lose. Well, they didn't lose against Texas. And so to me, Texas, you played yourself out of the playoff, not because you lost to Ohio State. You don't get credit for losing close to Ohio State. That's not a win. You still lost the game. You wanted to go up there and play them. If you had won that game, you would not have to worry about that loss to Florida. Kind of like how Alabama lost to Florida State, who is worse than Florida. They beat Georgia. What did you do in your game against Georgia? You got physically dominated and lost by 25 points. Sorry, Texas, you don't need to be in the playoff. Vanderbilt, okay. I like Vanderbilt. I like what I've seen out of Vanderbilt this year. The win over Tennessee this week, you looked dominant. Diego Pavia has looked fantastic the last couple weeks. He's going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate probably. I'd like to see Vanderbilt in the playoff. Here's the problem with Vanderbilt. Who have you beat? What's your best win? Tennessee? I mean, an 8-4 Tennessee team's your best win. So you had a 7-point win over Missouri. Well, Missouri didn't end the season ranked. Your 31-7 win over South Carolina doesn't look good because South Carolina didn't turn out being the team everybody thought they were going to be. You got a 30-14 loss against Alabama. I watched that game like I watch pretty much every game. I don't feel like it was as bad as the 30-14 score says, but you still lost by 16 points to Alabama. Okay, well, what is your other opportunity to really make a statement? At Texas, you get down huge early in the game. You come all the way back. If it's not for an onside kick through the hands, maybe you beat Texas, but you didn't. So you've got a head-to-head loss against the team in front of you. Now, you have one less loss than they do. So you could make an argument that Vanderbilt should be in front of Texas. Personally, I have to give the head-to-head to Texas. I have to say they won on the field against Vanderbilt. They have better wins than Vanderbilt has. That's why I've got Texas in front of Vanderbilt. So really, this is an example of missed opportunity. Yeah, you beat LSU. LSU didn't turn out to be the team we thought they were going to be. So they fired their coach this year. So to me, Vanderbilt is out, not because Vanderbilt's not a good team, but simply because you just didn't do enough to warrant being in the playoff. The playoff is for the best teams in college football who have resumes to back it up. I'm not saying Vanderbilt wouldn't win in a game against BYU. I'm not saying that by ranking Ohio State and Indiana 1 and 2 that I definitely think they are better than all the other teams. We're basing this off of resume. That's what we have to go off of. And that is really where I'm going with the problem with the committee. The committee doesn't have concrete criteria that stays the same, that is transparent, that makes sense. What you have is a lot of subjective, well, we feel this team is better than this team, so we're putting them in different pods. We're putting them in different groupings with no real justification for it. To me, where does the I feel this team is better or I like the analytics on this team better end? So you put Notre Dame in front of Miami, despite the head-to-head win and the same record. Where does that end? Okay, so if Ole Miss plays Ohio State for the national championship game, let's say Ole Miss beats Ohio State. They've got the same record. Does the committee go back and say, well, I know Ole Miss has the head-to-head national championship to Ohio State? No, that's ridiculous. So why are we doing the playoff rankings that way? It's not, well, we think this team is better, so you got to win 3 in a row. It's which team won on the field that day? Oh, Ole Miss? Okay, Ole Miss is a national champion, up for a playoff spot. Who won on the field that day? Miami. I just don't understand what we're doing with college football anymore, where the results on the field aren't the most important thing. I do not care what your analytic metrics are. I don't care that you scored 70 points against Syracuse. I don't care how good your running back is. Jeremiah Love deserves to be a Heisman candidate. Great for him. Jeremiah Love and Notre Dame didn't beat Miami on the field. Miami should be in the playoff over Notre Dame. So I really feel like what you've got here is you have brand bias. And I don't necessarily think that means all big teams. I don't think it means as I hear all the Big Ten people say all the time, I don't think it's SEC bias. If it was SEC bias, I don't think you would have Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, Oregon at 5. It's brand bias. And there is a distinct preconceived notion that teams like Alabama and Notre Dame are better than other teams. There's a feeling that they should be in the playoff. Miami's in the ACC, so they shouldn't be in the playoff. I'm not arguing that the ACC is as good as the Big Ten or the SEC. Hey, Notre Dame, you want to be in the playoff? You want to get that spot? Join a conference. Play a conference championship game. Now, I have my own thoughts about the conference championship games, whether they should or should not exist anymore. That's a topic for another day. If Notre Dame wants to be in equal treatment with the other teams, join a conference. That's how we can decide how good Notre Dame is. You don't get to schedule 2 good teams in a year, lose both games, sit out this week while a lot of these other teams, BYU, Ohio State, Georgia, are playing in their conference championship games. You want to earn that spot. Have another data point. Have another data point than Miami has. If Notre Dame had a conference championship game this week and they won, okay, well, that's a data point you can use to put them over Miami. They're not in a conference. But the committee continues to favor Notre Dame. Last year you had a loss to Northern Illinois, and it was like never even a question that we were going to put Miami in the playoff, Notre Dame. And Notre Dame went to the national championship game. Great, but the resume has to matter to get in that position, and it's not really fair to all the other teams for Notre Dame to not be in a conference, to not have the hurdle of a conference championship game, and I feel like there's also brand bias for Alabama. And at this point, so let's use this as an example. Before last week, Notre Dame was ranked in front of Alabama. Now, you could say that that was unwarranted. I think it was unwarranted, but it is what it is. So what happened last week? Alabama scrapes by in a 7-point win to over Auburn. Okay, we've already been over. Auburn hasn't had a great year this year. Anybody checking in on Auburn? Hasn't been very pretty. What did Miami do? Crushed the Pitt team, which Notre Dame's win over Pitt was used as the justification for why they should be in front of Miami. How is a 7-point skin of your teeth win over Auburn better than blowing out Pitt? It's not. But what did the committee do? They moved Alabama in front of Notre Dame and left Miami where they were, left Miami behind Notre Dame. To me, it's just silly. What did Alabama do to be moved up? Okay, you could say, well, they were correcting a mistake from the week before. Okay, fine. I'm all for that. Well, why not correct the mistake of having Miami in front? Needed Miami to be in front of Notre Dame. The reason is, and I'm going to make some Alabama people mad here, they want Alabama in the playoff. It's the same reason the SEC, Commissioner Sankey, is pushing for an expansion of the playoff. Alabama didn't get in last year. There's talk they might not get in this year. Let's say they lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Will they get in? The College Football Playoff Committee, the SEC, ESPN, everybody wants Alabama in the playoff. And I'm not saying it's a corrupt thing. I'm not saying it's some form of criminal enterprise. I just mean there's a bias towards Alabama. And I've seen Alabama get the benefit of the doubt here over the course of decades. Like, let's take it back. I'm going to go outside the playoff. 2007, the year of absolute unmitigated chaos. Georgia, and yes, this is going to sound like sour grapes. Georgia is ranked in the top 4. Let's last week of the season. Number 1 and number 2 lose. LSU loses. Well, we didn't move Georgia up to number 1 because at the time, the thought was you can't play for the national championship if you didn't win. You didn't play for your conference championship. You didn't win your own conference. So because Georgia had 2 losses in their own division, Tennessee goes to the SEC championship game. LSU wins that game. LSU's back in the national championship. Okay, fast forward 4 years. It's 2011. Alabama and LSU, number 1 and number 2, they play during the regular season. LSU wins that game. Okay, Alabama doesn't make it to the SEC championship game. They didn't even win their own division. What do? LSU wins the SEC championship. LSU goes to the national championship. And who do they face there? Alabama, who didn't go to the SEC championship game, who got to sit at home and rest while LSU played another game. Alabama blows out LSU in the national championship game. All good for Alabama. All right, let's fast forward again into the playoff. 2017 year. Georgia plays Auburn in the SEC championship. Both teams fighting for their playoff lives. Auburn crushed Georgia in the regular season. One of the worst losses as a Georgia fan I've ever experienced. SEC championship is a different story. Auburn had beat Georgia, had beat Alabama. All they had to do was win, and they're in. Georgia wins 28-7. Georgia's in the playoff. Who gets put into that other spot? Alabama. Alabama did not make the conference championship game. They're in the playoff. Okay, go to 2018. You have Georgia and Alabama playing in the SEC championship game. All the pundits on ESPN before the game said, okay, whatever happens in this game, both teams are going to the playoff. These are clearly 2 of the best 4 teams. Great. Okay, everybody's going to the playoff. What happens? A nail-biter 1-score loss for Georgia, and all of a sudden, the conversation flips. Oh, there's no way Georgia can get in. There's no way. Oklahoma won their conference championship game. They have to be in. They have to be in because they won the Big 12. So what happens? Alabama's in. Georgia's not. That's odd because the year before, conference championships didn't mean anything. The year before, Alabama got in without a conference championship. Okay. Then we go to 2023. You've got Georgia, 2-time defending national champion, undefeated in 2022, beats TCU by what was at the time the biggest margin of victory in the history of postseason college football. That team goes the next year, 2023, goes 15-0 again. Okay. Goes undefeated in the regular season. Got too many games there, not 15-0. So, undefeated regular season, plays Alabama in a completely unnecessary data point, a data point that a team like Notre Dame would not have to play. Georgia, with an injured Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, lose that game by 3 points. Georgia gets dropped from 1 to 6 because of a 3-point loss in the SEC championship game. And unlike the Alabama fans, I'm not going to whine and cry and say you didn't really win that game because we had some players hurt. You won the game. But why did the committee think that Georgia team didn't have any right to be in the playoff? And that's really where we're at. It's repeatedly you see that other teams don't necessarily get the benefit of the doubt. We have talks here this weekend. Oh, well, if Alabama loses, they shouldn't be out. That's not fair to punish them. You may or may not agree with that. I think there is a good argument either way. Personally, I don't think we need the conference championship games anymore. I think it is a punishment for the teams, and it is just a way to get them knocked out of the playoff. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see a team get knocked out because they had to play an extra game. However, if Alabama loses, they're a 3-loss team. Do they really need to be in? That's the conversation. But you're probably not going to see Alabama get left out if they lose that game. And you could make an argument that another team would be left out if they had lost that game, had 3 losses. And I know we're going from BCS, we're going to 4-team playoff, we're going to 12-team playoff. There's a lot of different factors at play. Every single season's different. All I'm saying is, I think we all know there's a little bit of a brand bias towards certain teams. And that brand bias is marring the playoff. You see people saying it's rigged, it's corrupt, it's, how could they do this? It's not fair. And they have a right to feel that way. I mean, we expanded the playoff because we were supposed to make sure all the most deserving teams get in, and it's not really shaping out that way. So I think what the committee is going to have to do, if you want to secure the integrity of your sport, if you want to secure the integrity of the college football playoff, you have to come up with transparent, concrete criteria that we all can see and look at. And it should not be analytics. It should not be how we feel about it. It should be head to head. Head to head has to be one of the key data points. You've got to have record. You've got to have strength of schedule. You've got to have. You can use strength of record if you want to. What are your key wins? What about your bad losses? Those things matter. To me, they matter a lot more than how did I subjectively think you looked, or what is your game control score? If we're not going to take the results on the field, why are we playing the games? There's no reason to play the games. You could go play against Division II schools, rack up 70 points, and then run around and declare yourself the national champion, a la UCF. It's ridiculous. So if the college football playoff wants to continue to be around and matter, we have to have more concrete criteria. We've got to have more transparency. And let's be honest, how many times do you watch the college football rankings show the last few years and find yourself saying, oh, hey, well, that's in direct contradiction to what you said last week. Or, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And I'm not saying that as a, corrupt thing. I'm saying that as maybe it's incompetence, or maybe it's just not clearly defined criteria. And I'm kind of tired of the fate of teams and fan bases being in the hands of a few athletic directors. Personally, I don't want in 2023 Florida's AD on that committee when you've got Georgia and Florida State trying to get into the playoff. And you can say that about any season. I don't want a handful of ADs subjectively deciding who's in the playoff. So we've got to change the playoff format. Personally, I don't think a 12-team playoff, I certainly don't think a 16, 18, 24-team playoff is the answer to that. I think the answer really is a 4, a 6, and 8-team playoff with clearly defined criteria. Now, that's not going to happen because of money and because we want more fan bases involved. But I don't think the answer is continuously expand the playoff so every team that has any argument to be in the playoff is in. Nobody wants to see a NCAA basketball tournament style college football playoff. These kids are already playing way too many games. You've got guys playing 12 games. They got a conference championship game. Then, to win the playoff, you might have to win 4 more games. I understand that we're paying a lot of these kids now, but they do not need to be playing 16 games and going to school. It's too much. We need to reduce the schedule. We need to shorten things, not lengthen them. And I think that we need to start thinking about the players, and we need to start thinking about the teams and who really should be in the playoff.